Hi everyone and welcome to Zoo Creates. I'm Tegan and this is Jessica, and today we are going to be showing you how to make a toad abode. So that means we are making a home for toads that could be living in your backyard. So today you're going to need a flower pot. Today we have plastic ones, but we would recommend a terracotta pot. There's a lot of advantages to that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. And then we have a lot of natural materials today. With the natural materials, they're gonna break down over time, so that might give you the opportunity to redecorate later on. Another thing you could do is you could paint it, and that might last you longer as a decoration. So that's why, with a terracotta pot, we recommend that you that the paint would stick better on that type of pot than a plastic pot. We are also going to be using hot glue today because that's not going to re-moisten if your toad abode is outside. So if you have younger kids, this is probably one that the parents are going to have to help out with. We do have low temperature ones, but definitely be careful when you're using hot glue because of the temperature. So,
all right, so my first question for you, Tegan, is when we get this outside after we've decorated it, how is it going to sit in the ground? That'll kind of help us get an idea of what parts we're going to be decorating.
Right. So we are going to set it up upside down. So when we have flowers in it, we want the hole to be on top, but we're going to flip it over so that it's more of a hide for your toad to hide in. So we want to decorate the bottom of the pot and the sides of the pot.
And then how is the toad going to enter this house? Do we need to cut a hole in it? Do we just maybe tip it on its side or prop it up against a rock? What's the best way to set it up outside?
So I think that there are a couple options. Probably the easiest option is just to have it tilted up a little bit and set it within rocks. So you might make a little landscape with your toad abode so that they can get under there.
That sounds great. And then again, if they're the plastic ones, the wind might blow it a little bit more if it's not in a sheltered area, but those terracotta pots are heavier, so we wouldn't have quite so big of a problem. Okay.
Yeah, that'll set down easier. So if you do have a plastic one, maybe with that landscape, you'll have it propped up, but you'll also maybe have one on top that kind of holds it in place.
Yeah, all right.
Awesome, so we can start decorating.
What kinds of toads do we have around here that might utilize this house?
Let's see. So we have a couple different toads.
I think one of my favorite ones is the American toad. I know that they're pretty common around here.
Yes.
Right now, I noticed that we can hear them a lot outside.
Definitely, yeah. In the springtime, they are definitely nice and noisy.
You can always tell an American toad. One of my favorite ways to know I'm hearing an American toad is I always think of those old sci-fi movies with aliens in it, and it kind of sounds like a little alien ray gun that's trilling outside. That's what it kind of reminds me of, or maybe a spaceship from one of those really old black and white alien space movies. That's how I always remember what their call sounds like.
So when you are deciding where you're going to put this in your yard, we want to kind of think about what toads like in a habitat. So they're going to want to be somewhere probably more low-lying in your yard, somewhere where it's going to stay more moist or wet. They aren't necessarily going to live in water like maybe some of the frogs we know of, but they definitely need water, and they like it where it's damp.
So maybe a good place would be like in a dark corner of your flower garden?
Yes, or maybe even, I know I often find toads in my window wells.
Would be a good place to put one of these.
I think it's also It's really fun. You can get really creative with these and kind of turn them into fairy gardens, if you've ever seen a fairy garden. You also want to think about maybe what those toads like to eat, because animals like to live close to their food sources.
So what would their food source be? What do toads like to eat?
Well, toads like to eat lots of different kinds of bugs. So they might even be wanting to eat bugs that you don't want around your house.
That'd be really good.
Yeah, so they can help keep those populations in check so that you're not getting a bunch of pests in your yard that you don't want. Awesome.
What kinds of natural materials are you putting on your Toad Abode?
So I'm putting some rocks, I put an acorn hat, some leaves, and some bark. It's gonna be a very nice natural made home for our toad.
Maybe with some of these natural materials that we're putting on them, that might even encourage some of the food that the toads like to eat to come in here now.
Definitely. That's something you could think about. Maybe selecting some things out of your yards that you know bugs like to eat.
Mm-hmm. Like some flowers or grass.
Awesome.
All right. I think I am going to call that good for my Toad Abode.
Nice.
All right, well, for our animal visitor today, I brought a toad to share with everyone. So I'm going to get ready to have him come out.
I'll get my mask on so I'm ready.
The mask seems to be a little bit more complicated than yours. Yours goes on a lot easier than mine did. All right. Okay. I'll get some gloves on. And we'll kind of talk about a little bit about the differences between frogs and toads.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about how they're not necessarily going to live in water, and not all frogs have to live, in the water. They do breathe, so they're not living underwater all the time. So it makes sense that some don't have to be living near water.
Okay, so here I have Stevie, and she is called a cane toad or a marine toad, and she is a very large toad. So now the biggest frogs or toads that we have here in Iowa are bullfrogs. They can grow pretty big. They can probably get to about the same size as Stevie. I've seen some really big bullfrogs. But Stevie is not from around here. She is native to South America, down in the rainforest around, down in Brazil and Central America. That's where she's going to be found in the wild. You can also find these guys in Australia and even down in Florida. And they're not supposed to be in Australia and in Florida. They're what's called an invasive species down there, and that's not a good thing. So what happened was marine toads in Central America, they kind of eat whatever fits in their mouth. So we talked about how toads like to eat bugs, and Stevie likes to eat bugs. She gets crickets and mealworms here at the zoo. She'll also eat earthworms, but she also eats mice. So anything that she can pretty much fit in her mouth is what she's going to eat. And so the farmers that were growing sugarcane in Australia, they were having a problem with this beetle, a cane beetle, and they were eating all their crops. And so the farmers thought, there's these toads that kind of are really readily available in South America, and they kind of eat, they're not picky eaters, they'll eat anything. So let's bring them here and maybe they'll help us out and eat all of the bugs. Well, that didn't work. Instead, they started eating everything else, and they just started to multiply. And now they're a really big problem. They're eating things that we don't want them to be eating. And so they're a big problem, which is a good example of why it's really not good that if you have an animal, like if you get a pet, I know that sometimes people get pet snakes because they think that that'd be a really good idea. That'd be a really cool pet to have. And then they realize, oh, a snake wasn't the best pet for me because I don't want to take care of it for its entire life, which could be, 25 years. Or it's too much work for me, and so people will just say, oh, just let it go outside. It can take care of itself. But that's not really the best thing. We don't want to let critters go outside that don't belong there. And so that's what happened in Florida and in Australia. It's a really good habitat for these toads, but they started kind of taking over. So it's better to leave them where they're native to. Now, we kind of talked about that there's a difference between frogs and toads, and one of the biggest differences is their skin. And so frogs and toads, they're amphibians, so they have skin, but frogs kind of have smooth, moist skin, so it's kind of wet. And toads have rougher, drier, bumpier skin. So you can see on Stevie, she's got little bumps all over her back, and she's a lot drier. So she spends more time in the dirt, in the mud, on the ground, underground, than in a tree or near the pond. So she doesn't need to be quite as moist as our frogs would be. But she still could swim if she wanted to. She does have webbed feet, so if she wanted to go in the water, she could. And she does need to stay somewhat hydrated, so she needs a moist environment. Even toads that live in the desert where it's really dry, they live underground in the desert, so that way it's a little bit less dry. So another thing about amphibians is that they are all born in the water. So they lay their eggs, amphibians lay eggs, and they kind of look like jelly beans when they're in the water, but they're really, really squishy. They don't have a shell like the chicken eggs that we see. So they hatch in the water. And do you know what a baby frog or toad is called?
A tadpole.
That's right. It's called a tadpole. So they look nothing like an adult frog or toad. They have a tail. They have no arms or legs. They have gills, so they breathe underwater. And then they go through a process called metamorphosis. That's a really big word that just means change. They go through a transformation, a change, and they'll grow legs and arms, and they'll lose their tail, and they'll lose their gill and develop lungs, which is what we have to breathe. And they'll come out of the water and live on land. So that's one of the characteristics of amphibians. All right, do you have any good questions about Stevie here?
No, so I was just thinking about that. So we want to put these toad abodes somewhere where it's a moist environment, but maybe we need to think about if there is a water source, if we want more toads, right? So thinking about maybe where a mother could go put her eggs.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Have it near a water source, so that way when they're ready to lay eggs, they can go to the water and lay their eggs. That's a good idea. All right, one of the ways that these toads keep themselves safe, they find a nice burrow to hide in, but they also can do something else. You can see Stevie's pretty big, but she can make herself even bigger. She can puff out her sides, and she can take a really deep breath and puff up her sides and make herself really, really big, which just makes it look to predators that might want to eat her like she's too big to eat, because a lot of predators will only, they don't want to eat things that are too big, and so she makes herself look really big and scary. Another thing is she has these special glands on the back of her head. I'll turn her around so you can see. She's got these special glands on the back of her head behind her eyes, and when she gets scared, she can release this milky white sticky stuff. And that does not taste good. And it even can, if it gets on our skin, it can make our skin a little itchy. And that helps keep her safe. So it's a toxin that she releases, so that way animals will leave her alone.
Very cool. And we know about poison dart frogs, that they have toxins on their skin as well, right?
Absolutely. There are lots of frogs and toads that have toxins either in their skin or a toxin that they can release as well.
Yeah, so one thing I noticed on her skin, she is light and dark, and it looks like that would be really good for having, allowing her to blend into her surroundings, so that camouflage that we've talked about.
Absolutely, yes, and again, that's why she spends so much time down on the ground in the dirt, is because she's going to be really hard to see down in the dirt and the rocks and the logs. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. There aren't very many toads that are brightly colored. They're mostly gray, brown, and black, for sure. And all of the bumps on their skin are going to help them camouflage as well.
Thank you for joining us, guys. Please share your photos with us. We love to see all of the crafts you guys have been making. Bye.